So thank you all so much for joining us today. This is the last webinar of our 2022 monthly iMapInvasives webinar series. Thank you to all who've joined us throughout the year. And today we have as our speaker Fate Saiwang Nuon he's a SUNY ESF grad student also working with NYNHP, and his topic today is visualizing post-treatment data using iMapInvasives. Just a housekeeping comment, there is a chat box, so feel free to enter any questions you have along the way. And in general, we'll keep most of the questions to the end. So Fate's going to talk about his work and also show you some web mapping that he's done. I'll hand it over to Fate.
All right, thanks, Mitch. And thanks everyone for joining here today. Excited to talk about post-treatment and wrapping up the year of awesome IMAP content. So yeah, we'll be talking about visualizing post-treatment data using iMapInvasives. So let's get right into it. All right, so what is the project? I'm gonna go ahead and point everyone to the bottom line, which I literally put at the bottom there. In a nutshell, we're trying to increase the abundance, use, and consistency of post-treatment data for the purpose of understanding our management impacts. There's a lot of moving parts to that, but in general, we're trying to increase the flow of post-treatment data into iMapInvasives, work towards consistency and standardization in terms of data collection, and we want to look at historical and current post-treatment data to look at things like the outcomes of treatment and effectiveness. So for me, I like to think of it also in some simpler terms, in terms of how can we use post-treatment data, what are the questions that we're trying to ask and the answers we're trying to get. And for me, the big questions are, one, what are the outcomes of treatment? So what happened? Two, which treatments are effective? So are we successful or unsuccessful? And three, why are treatments effective or ineffective? In general, I would say that right now we're doing pretty good at looking at the outcomes of treatment. So that's the main question we're focused on right now, but future steps of this project will dive deeper into what's effective and why. A little more background. So, why do all this? If you skim the literature, there's a lot out there that's said about conservation management in general and evaluation in general. I found this article from, I think, the early 2000s to be pretty scathing. Do conservation managers use evidence to support their decision making? So in general, they were saying, decisions, management decisions should be based on effectiveness as demonstrated by review of evidence. But despite that, many management interventions remain unevaluated or inaccessible. And then in the upper right, we have an article closer to home here in the Adirondacks where they were looking at Phragmites management, and somewhere in the intro they wrote that there's surprisingly little evidence to assess success of invasive plant management. So generally the literature is sort of agreed that we should be evaluating things and we aren't necessarily doing such a good job of that, especially when it comes to invasive plants. I'll also point to the comprehensive management plan for the state. They've got about 8 overarching sort of tasks and goals, and the last one is evaluating success. So there's sort of a well-documented need to take a look at all of this hard work we're doing and say, what's going on with that work. I don't necessarily know everyone here in the audience, so just want to do a quick refresher on IMAP data, the structure, the lingo. I'm sure this will be reviewed for most of you, but we'll just do this so we're all on the same page. So IMAP data is observation-based, and it's organized into these types of records, so presences, treatments, non-detected records, and searched areas. So we have presences. This is a standard record of where invasive species are found. They'll tell you where they are, the size, the percent cover, distribution, when you found it, things like that. We've got treatments, which are records of when and where treatment happens, the area that's treated, what type of treatment you did, and the goal of that treatment. We have not detected records, which are when you look for something and you don't find it. This is very important to the concept of post-treatment data in general, because often we are trying to remove an invasive, and so recording these not detected records is critical to understanding if our attempts to remove something are working. So one of the things we're trying to do, or I'll rephrase it this way, there's no post-treatment layer in IMAP as of right now. There is a lot of information, a lot of really powerful tools, but in order to get a view of the effectiveness of management, you have to do a lot of your own digging. What we're trying to do is essentially remove that element for you. We're trying to visualize it in a simpler way without you having to do all that digging on your own. And so, when you look at the raw data, there's like a lot going on here. So what we want to do is sort of filter down. So this is if you filter just on those treatments, and then ideally one day we'll get towards something like this, which would be really going from this to this, summarizing that raw data into something that's sort of easy to look at, quick to understand. And as an example, this would be looking at the different sort of active management statuses. This way you could easily look at what needs follow-up, what's already been eradicated, and where you're still working. Okay, so standardizing a data collection workflow. We're kind of jumping around a little bit. There's a lot of moving parts to this whole project. So before we really got into visualizing, we wanted to think about how can we collect data better moving forward. And so to do that, we put together a little work group and we put together a pilot app to test out a sort of standardized set of fields. Essentially, this would be a quicker, faster way of collecting post-treatment data, one that would work consistently between different groups. So to do that, we needed to basically take stock of all of the fields in IMAP. So I'm sure we've all used some of the fields in IMAP, but there are actually quite a few, some that, are a little bit more difficult to find if you haven't used it more or aren't looking for it. So on the left, you can see a pretty comprehensive list of all the possible fields you could fill out. And what we wanted to do was sort of trim that down to sort of what I call like the standardized bare minimum. What can we get away with if we only collect this data? We can come back later and use that to analyze the effectiveness of management. Something that would be quick and easy, more or less. So we sort of filtered down to these fields on the right. And I'll just jump forward. We put that into a Survey 123 collection app. I'll just go over this really quickly, but essentially, mostly you just have to collect the name, the area, when you went there, take a photo, things like that. If you detected the species, you're basically just collecting percent cover, species distribution. There's a couple of optional fields. And again, these are all fields that already exist in IMAP, just put in here. If you didn't detect it, it's even easier. You basically just have to say how long you were there. These last fields, though, are not already in IMAP. I added this just to get an idea qualitatively of how managers were assessing their sites. And basically, this evaluation section just goes over management goals. It adds a section on evaluating qualitatively how you think it's going. So is it regressing or progressing? And then lastly, a follow-up plan. And this was sort of to make it easier to start strengthening the links between how managers think about their projects and how the data reflects that progress. And so we had a handful of folks from different prisms and state agencies basically go out and use this at a couple of sites. We also talked through sort of the basic workflow to get on the same page. So the basic workflow for collecting post-treatment data with this app is you should already have a pre-treatment and treatment in IMAP. So that's the treatment and pre-treatment, and then the post-treatment, everything below that dashed line flows into a fairly simple flow chart. Is the invasive you're treating present? Yes or no? If no, you go to non-detected. If yes, it's a presence. and then you just fill out the form. The stuff in these gray boxes is stuff that ideally are basically outcomes of treatment or active statuses that you wouldn't collect using the app. It would just come about naturally as a result of you collecting the data. So this is what that looks like once it's collected. And here are a handful of the species. Well, no, these are all of the species that were collected over the summer just using the app. And they're split out into detected versus not detected records. As you can see, a lot of the non-detections are driven by garlic mustard and hogweed, but there's an interesting assortment of species here. And then we also had that qualitative progress I was mentioning earlier. Happy to say almost everybody views their management projects as progressing, so that's a really great sign. We even had a couple where the goal was met. And then just a couple other notes that I found interesting. So we gave the option for native species assessment. Only about 25% of the records took that into account. And then with the goals, about 83% of folks have eradication as the stated goal. So just things to consider. So the feedback and the next steps are fairly simple at this point. So basically, the goal was sort of to refine the data collection process, not necessarily collect data for this year. And generally, we received approval from the users on the content, the speed, the usability, and then sort of our next steps are really just to integrate this workflow with existing IMAP tools and sort of the different folks who end up using it. So cool, that was the standardizing data collection section. And then this next part is actually visualizing the data that we already have in IMAP. So I put together this outcome viewer. This is a dashboard, and we'll be exploring this map in just a little bit. But the basic idea of this concept is we are trying to categorize the outcome of essentially all of the treatment records that we have in IMAP as of today. So big undertaking, a lot of moving parts, but this dashboard is showing things like treatment sites by the tier and by the outcome and what species are being treated and things like that. But it can be used for a lot more, and we'll get into that in a sec. But before I do that, I wanted to just talk a little bit about how I made this map. So I can get feedback on it, and we can sort of understand that together. And again, the goal is to sort of get from this to something simpler like this. So this is an actual screen cap from the map that we'll be looking at in a little bit. Okay, so the map creation process. The first thing that we want to do is organize by location and species. So what do I mean by that? When making the map, all of the sort of spatial units of analysis flow from the treatment polygons themselves. So here we have two overlapping treatment polygons, and I've made them the same color so you can see that they're the same species. Now we have our presence points, which are layered on there. I have two sort of colors, so there's the yellow and the gray, and the gray species are species that don't match. So those are species that we need to indicate already. If we were treating knotweed here, and there's Phragmites species present, we're not really worried about that right now. We're just trying to look at this one species at a time. And then we also have some non-detected records, often overlapping. And we want to keep the ones that intersect and also match the species that we're trying to look at. So again, only keep the records that match the treatment species and then intersect our site area. What do I mean by our site area? I went ahead and merged all treatment polygons that are overlapping and belong to the same species. And these created essentially sort of like quasi sites. And there's roughly 5,000 to 6,000 of those in the state as of right now. So I went ahead and only kept those presences that matched and fell within the site area. And then this not detected area also matches, also intersects, so we kept that. Then we want to go ahead and look at the dates. So, you can only really interpret what's happening at this management site if you understand when everything happened. So you're going to go ahead and sort all of the records, categorize them by type, and categorize them by date. And then lastly, we're going to summarize the outcome, and we can do that by just creating a simple point marker where that site is. And we do that using the most recent record that is on top of all of that data. So in this particular example, the not detected record is our most recent record. So we end up symbolizing the site as not having any invasive plants at the moment, because the last recorded piece of information is that there wasn't anything there. Okay, so before we get into the map, I just want to make sure we understand sort of where the map is now versus what kind of outcome categories we're trying to get in the future. So right now, the map will show you basically 3 treatment outcomes, and they're all based on our sort of IMAP record categories. The first is not detected. That means there's no invasive plants there. The second is a presence. That means there still are invasive plants there, or it extends to animals as well. And then treatment would be, there's basically no post-treatment data at the moment. So there's just, the last thing we know is that you went there and you treated it. But we know that it's a little more complicated than that. So in the future, what we're driving towards is, so for the not detected section, we're looking at filtering based on how many years of consecutive non-detections you're getting. So if you have 3 or more years, you would put that into the presumed eliminated category. If you have less, you would just mark it as you need to continue to do monitoring to make sure that it's really gone. For presences, we might want to look at how recently you actually looked at this site. If it's greater than 2 years ago, we'll ask you, is it still active? We will want to check in on the folks who enter that data and say, hey, is this site still active? If we have recent enough information, we'll want to go ahead and look at existing percent cover and size data. If it's not available, then we'll want to check in with that data entry person again, or with that organization and say, do we know anything about how the size is changing? And if it is available, we can start to break it into these more nuanced categories. It's moving away from the goal. It's the same as last year, or it's moving towards the goal. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, if the most recent record is just a treatment, then we don't actually know anything about what happened there. Again, we would flag that as needs follow-up. All right, so I'm going to pop out of here and I'm going to switch over to this. And I will take some questions in a little bit, but first I wanted to show everybody this map. Can everyone see this okay? Mitch, is it up?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's the map. You should be able to see the legend over here. So we have our yellows are not detected records, presences are green, treatments are brown. And again, this is a dot at every treatment site showing what the most recent piece of information we have is. So we can use this to ask a lot of different questions. I'm just going to go through a couple of examples. So for example, we can use our handy dandy filter, go over here and say, we want to look for a specific species. Maybe we're curious as to where, I'm trying to choose an example, unlabeled swallowworts are. So it looks like we've got a lot of swallowworts up here in the Slilo prism, or Maybe we're curious about purple loosestrife. Looks like that's mostly in the Adirondacks. So we can use it to just find where someone is treating a specific species. What are some other things we can do? We can look at, for example, maybe we're curious, maybe we're trying to follow up on some things. Maybe we want to look at things that have received 2 years of treatment. But the most recent record is a treatment, so we don't actually know what happened there yet. So now we've got a map of spots that have received 2 years of treatment but have had no follow-up, so we don't actually know what happened there. So maybe that's great. Maybe this is a map for flagging your next season of monitoring visits or something like that. Another way you could use it. Maybe you're curious about what are the tier 2 species, those high priority guys that we're treating right now. Looks like there a lot of them down in the lower Hudson, but they're all over. And our table will update to whatever filter we have on. So as you can see, normally there should be 5,000 records, but there's only 377 right now. We can also make charts based on this. So we looked at count by scientific name. So we're looking at tier 2 species. We can see that's largely driven by Scotch broom, I believe, and giant hogweed. So things like that. And the tiers are specific to the prisms. We're not using the statewide prism. So if a particular treatment falls in the Adirondacks, it pulls the Adirondack tier for that species when that goes into this map. What are some other things we can do? We can look at species. Here's another one I find useful. Look at species with no info since 2018. So we'll look at that most recent record date. We'll say, is it before January 1st, 2019? Pull that table back open. So yeah, so we've got a handful of spots that haven't really had follow-up, or maybe they still need to be marked as presumed eliminated or something like that. We don't really know what happened at a bunch of these sites, so things to think about. So I'm going to just take a quick moment to pause. If anybody has any questions about anything so far, can feel free to ask, or more specifically, if there's something you want to look at in this map right now, happy to take those questions as well. And you can throw that in the chat or however we want to do this.
Yeah, please feel free to enter questions into the chat. I don't see anything in there right now.
Cool. I will just give it a few minutes or a minute, or we can just move on. That's fine too.
You can also, people can raise their hands.
Oh, yes.
A little hand icon at the bottom of your screen. But we'll also have time later for more questions if nothing's coming to mind right now.
Yeah, sounds good. And yeah, I'll say just generally, excited about the possibilities with this map. We're continuing, to add different kinds of data into it so we can ask more and more questions and use it in more different ways. There are definitely some data gaps that we know about. This isn't a perfect map by any means. For example, we know there's been a lot of purple loosestrife biocontrol treatments over the years, or EAB, and not all of that data is in here. And we're working on getting some of those, or certain regions, sort of the crosswalking process is a little bit different. So we have a little bit less data from some regions than others. So it's not a perfect map, but at a bare minimum, what it's doing is highlighting, where we don't have information and things that we need to follow up on. I think I saw something.
So Yes, there is something in the chat now. I can read the comment. It's from Naya Kraus. It says, we monitor our sites for 3 years and then again at year 6 and year 9.
Yeah.
Do you have a way to track that later monitoring?
Not currently at the moment, but it would be not too much of a stretch to add that. Yeah, we're still sort of working on the way that we mark things as complete. And again, we're sort of still trying to figure out if we're going to have one standardized system for that, or if different organizations sort of want to choose how they filter that. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. And I know the giant hogweed data set is very close to being in here. So some of that data is in here, but not all of it. So that will definitely fill this map up a lot more as well. Good point.
Cool. Looks like that's all our questions for right now, but we'll feel free to enter more in and we can get to those afterwards.
Great. Sounds good. I'm going to hop. Oh, is that somebody? Okay. I'm going to hop out of here. And I'm going to jump back over to this presentation so we can get through sort of our last little section. So we've talked about standardizing things and visualizing them, but we also want to figure out what can we learn from the data itself. So, and here's a great moment to jump into the chat. There are lots and lots of questions we can ask with the push-driven data that is available to us. For every one of these variables, we can look at how they relate to the results. And we can look at how those interactions interact with each other, right? So we could look at, are treatment outcomes driven by species or method or number of treatments or the initial infestation area? There's tons and tons and tons of questions we could ask. I'm just trying to get through them one at a time as I think of them, but I'm always open to more feedback on what people are curious about. So if you have, post-treatment data questions you're interested in, feel free to throw them in the chat and I can look at them later. I love feedback and ideas on this kind of thing. So first I'm going to get through a couple of descriptive statistics. I think somebody from the team was asking me at one point, do people use distribution or percent cover more? And again, this is all data that falls into treatment area. So this isn't all of the IMAP data. It's just those that are within treatment sites. Here we have two graphs looking at the presence polygons and how they're distributed in terms of percent cover class and distribution class. As you can see, there's a nice, pretty simple correlation between the two. Sparse is basically the same as 5 to 25%, and so on and so forth. We have not applicables at the end. So, in an ideal world, that number is 0, but that's actually a pretty low amount. So good stuff there. People are really using these fields with presence polygons. With points, it's a little bit different. In general, points do not contain percent cover data or distribution, and just something to think about moving forward with data collection, and the way that I interpret data, that we interpret data. Polygons tend to carry more information, but points are used for sort of a different thing. And if there's a mismatch there, we should figure out how to do that. As you can see, a huge number of points do not contain percent cover class or distribution data. But if I had to say generally, more presence points contain distribution data, and that might be because of the way iMapBasic is structured. Would have to look more into it, but just thought that was interesting. We can look at things like tiers over time. So obviously the modern tier system, the way it exists, has only existed for a couple of years, but sort of retroactively grafted it onto the last 5 years or so. And it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see, especially if you start at 2018, that blue column, those are tier 2 species. Those are an increasingly recorded type of treatment, whereas the tier 4s are somewhat stable. Other descriptive statistics, I made this terrible, very hard to read graph on the left. I was trying to parse the data on chemical treatment methods. but I realized quickly that there's often a mix and match. In general, the obvious outlier is that solo foliar spray is sort of the main chemical treatment method, but there's lots of others. And in the future, we'll want to look at how treatment outcome is related to those types of things. On the right, we have every sort of recorded treatment record. These are not aggregated by site. These are individual treatments. And I just went ahead and highlighted all the ones that actually could be grouped with another one. For example, knotweed species unknown could potentially be grouped with Japanese knotweed if you want to look at things more simply. But yeah, so there's a list of, I believe it's anything that is in the 75th percentile of treatment records. So the most treated species by far. And we got a lot of tier 2 sort of coming up in that bottom part of the list. I also went ahead and looked at, I found this very interesting, the top 10 treated species by treatment method. And I think sort of the immediate thing that jumped out to me with this graph is that for most species, there appears to be sort of a one or the other approach at this point. And, that makes sense. These species have all been treated many, many times by many, many people. And so sort of settling on a single method, we've got with Phragmites, knotweed, those are predominantly chemical treatments. And then for these other species, predominantly manual. If someone finds this to be inaccurate, definitely feel free to let me know. We can figure out what's going on in the data. But I do think this is also really useful to think about from the perspective of folks who are not super immersed in the invasive species world or are new to the field or are from other states with less robust data structures. It can be useful to sort of understand what is sort of the best management practice. What are people actually doing out there in the field? And so, yeah, we can see that generally people have settled on one method or the other for a lot of these commonly treated species. Yeah, and then I think this is one of my last slides. I went ahead and put together a bunch of summary statistics to sort of highlight, as I was saying earlier, the map and this data are showing us a lot about what we don't know yet. And we're trying to close those data gaps. But I found sort of two types of information from this kind of summary data, which are data gaps and then things that we want to explore more. So for example, data gaps, we've got aquatic and biocontrol treatments. So generally, there are very few biocontrol treatments in IMAP. That's a pretty big data gap that we're working on closing. We found some of those sources and working on getting those in there. And then with aquatic, also sort of a surprising number, surprisingly few recorded treatments, and then alarmingly no non-detecteds on top of an existing aquatic treatment. I'm sure that's not true. So we will be working with folks to figure out where that information is. And then if you look in the top right here, so this column all the way on the right and this top right graph are unmonitored single treatments. So that's every site in which there was a treatment and no follow-up data. And that comprises about 56.1% of the record. So in general, we are monitoring about 44% of treatments, just generally, or treatment sites. And so I'm sure we want that number to increase, but obviously there's things like budgetary restrictions and things like that. And then lastly, there's a sort of lower monitoring rate for physical treatments. It makes sense. There should be more monitoring for chemical treatments. There's a lot more regulations around those. But, just something to note. And then with our trends to explore, one thing I found kind of interesting was that sort of counter to my initial expectation, non-detection rates actually decrease with the number of treatment years. So if a site has been treated many times, it's actually less likely that you will find a non-detection record there. One interpretation of that is that those are typically going to be tier 4 sites where we know that eradication is generally non-feasible. Or maybe they're very large sites, so we still need to look at the size discrepancies there. And it also sort of highlights the importance of early detection and rapid response, which works. I think is one of the things that this data is showing. And then, yeah, that low aquatic non-detection rate is another thing to keep an eye on. That might just be missing data, or it could be a real thing. We will have to find out. I saw a question, and we're going to get to that in a second. This is actually my last slide, so plenty of time for questions. So just the takeaways really quick. Again, I think we've learned a lot about what we don't know. We need to fill those data gaps, and the map also needs to be refined at small scales. I can maybe jump back to the map later and show this, but as of right now, we have a lot of clusters of sites that could probably be grouped together based on the way people record data. So we need to figure out how to do that sort of thing better. Another takeaway is that I think the map and reports are really flexible, and we can keep adding data to it because just to reestablish, there are a lot of tools in IMAP and other sort of geospatially based tools. There's a lot of data being collected. So there's a lot there to work with, which makes this whole process really flexible and hopefully useful to managers in a number of different ways. Another lesson I learned, particularly from the standardization process, is that more data, more consistency is really important to being able to track evaluation of treatment. Like one thing in general is it's difficult to say track the effectiveness of a treatment on, say, a Phragmites stand. Typically, you'll want to do that by size and by percent cover. But if those two pieces of information aren't collected every year, it gets difficult to really look at what's going on there. Because right now, basically, we're just working on presence absence data, so our outcomes are very binary, and we want to nuance those. So the way to make that work is more consistency with data. And then lastly, your feedback and feedback of managers and users will be very helpful for improving the map and the reports that come out of it moving forward. So I linked my emails there. The top one is shorter, but the bottom one I have less spam in. So either way, I'll definitely get back to you if you reach out to me. And that's all I had. So we can do questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Fate, for that great presentation. So yeah, we can do questions now. I see there is one in the chat box right now, so I can read that. And
yeah,
so put more questions in the chat box. And after I read this question, I'll also open up the attendee list so I can see if anyone raises their hand. And if you raise your hand, then I can unmute you. So the question from Eric is it possible to filter by habitat type or ecological community, for example, Phragmites in freshwater wetlands versus tidal wetlands, or aquatic invasives by watershed?
Yeah, definitely not at the current state of the map, but that is something I will look into adding. I'd be curious to see which particular, it's definitely something that's doable, but I'd have to essentially select a map to pull that data from. But yeah, more than willing to add that in. One thing that isn't in there now, but I did get to doing is the sort of type of plants. But yeah, I think adding a habitat is a great idea. I'll look into that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions yet.
Hands up?
Don't see any hands up either. So I'll do a formal end and thank you, but then we still have 20 minutes, so we can stay on if people come up with questions during that. So I'll just say thank you so much to Fate for presenting and to all the partners he's been working with on this project. And thank you to everyone who attended today. Please feel free to keep in touch. I will be posting a recording of this on YouTube, and people who registered will get a link to that to rewatch any parts. And so this is the last webinar of our monthly series for the year. So I hope everyone has a good holiday season, and we'll see everyone again in January.
Thanks, everyone.